news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. Reigning unified featherweight champion Amanda Serrano, on the heels of her mega fight with Katie Taylor, stated via her own social media that she will be back in August of this year, which comes as no surprise to me. I anticipated that Amanda Serrano might return to action sometime late this summer because it just so happens that her promoter and friend, Jake Paul,
He said he's coming back in August as well.
I think a lot of people were expecting an immediate rematch with Katie Taylor in Katie Taylor's native Ireland at Croker Park. And while Amanda Serrano returning in August doesn't necessarily mean there won't be a rematch.
Let's not jump to conclusions.
Look, I told you after the fight, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Amanda Serrano return to the featherweight division. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see her resume her campaign to become that division's undisputed champion. I give her good odds, very good odds, to knock out the likes of Sarah Mahfoud and Erica Cruz. At minimum, I give her good odds to outpoint them. They don't have the level of expertise or the experience as champions that Amanda Serrano has.
It's entirely possible that she resumes that campaign.
And resuming that campaign doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely scrapping the idea of facing Katie Taylor yet again. I think we have to cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't know where this leaves the Katie Taylor rematch, though I'm not surprised to hear that Amanda Serrano will be returning to action in the very near future and presumably on the undercard of Jake Paul's next fight.
In reference to Jake Paul's next fight, Showtime executive Stefan Espinoza has revealed
that they are aggressively pursuing Jake Paul's next fight, but he is a network free agent and has interest from other broadcasters.
And I imagine that one of those broadcasters is the DAZN platform.
Don't forget that Taylor vs. Serrano was a joint promotion helmed by both Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul's most valuable promotions. They've already done business in the past.
I wouldn't be at all surprised to hear that one of those broadcasters interested in staging Jake's next fight is DAZN.
We'll see if Jake don't change his decorum. We'll see if Showtime can't work something out with him so that he can stay on their platform. We'll see what happens. In any event, I'm not at all surprised to hear that Amanda Serrano could be returning to action in the near future against someone other than Katie Taylor.
Relatively, Amanda Serrano was already the biggest name in the featherweight division.
Her pairing up with Jake Paul and the success, the attention that the Katie Taylor fight got, that only enhanced her profile.
It's more of a financial incentive to fight Amanda Serrano now, if you're a contender, if you're a champion.
A champion like Sarah Mahfoud, who was in action earlier this year, a champion like Mexico's own Erica Cruz. I mean, if you're not trying to fight Amanda Serrano at 126 pounds, who are you trying to fight? What are you trying to do?
I can only hope that the success of Taylor versus Serrano inspired these other fighters, these other champions, to take on Amanda.
Because this entire endeavor, pairing up with most valuable promotions, having that mega fight with Katie, it has only further enhanced Amanda's profile in spite of Amanda losing the fight and losing a decision. She still is the biggest name and the most recognizable fighter, recognizable champion in the featherweight division that will provide the biggest purse for any champion who so chooses to try and unify titles with her. I can only hope that the success of Taylor versus Serrano inspired Sarah Mahfoud and Erica Cruz.
Let's see if she can't get one of them in the ring.
Now, as far as a Katie Taylor rematch, Croker Park or somewhere else, whether or not they'll even revisit the idea of a second fight of a rematch, I gotta be honest, I favor Katie Taylor to win the rematch in even more decisive fashion than she did the first fight.
I told you guys for years, Katie Taylor on points was my pick.
My unwavering prediction, I told you that Katie Taylor has experience with naturally bigger girls and big punchers more so than Amanda Serrano does. So even if her power is for real, it's nothing that Katie hasn't seen before and hasn't weathered, hasn't powered through.
In a second fight, she'll have the first fight to draw from and correct her mistakes.
Same way she did in the Persoon rematch. The rematch, she won more decisively than she did the first fight.
There's some sour grapes after that first Persoon fight.
And some sour grapes after the Amanda Serrano fight. People saying they had Amanda winning the fight, that it was a robbery.
Listen, I don't have time for that shit.
I don't have time for your nationalism, your tribalism. I don't have time for your scorecard. I fucking told you. I told you ahead of time. Katie Taylor on point.
That's what I told you. If you said something else, that's your fucking problem.
That is just your fucking problem. And if arguing with me is your coping mechanism, you need to find some other way to cope, because I told you. Katie Taylor on points. That's the way it's going to go. In a rematch situation, I'd wager Katie Taylor learns from the mistakes she made in the first fight and wins even more emphatically.
Don't misunderstand me. She had to go through hell and high water in the first fight to secure that W.
She had to pull herself back from the brink. She came very close to being stopped, and I am acknowledging that, but it's that she will draw from and correct in a second fight. So my pick for a rematch, if one happens, is Katie Taylor on points.
Let's just see if the rematch actually happens.
In men's heavyweight news, according to Eddie Hearn, who very recently spoke to Behind the Gloves Boxing, they've moved on from Adam Kownacki, who reportedly turned down a 7-figure offer for Derek Chisora. And Derek Chisora could now fight July 23rd against a better opponent. And
I'm not surprised. We discussed this several times here on the channel already.
back when Adam Kownacki was an unbeaten fighter, Anthony Joshua, he was supposed to be making his U.S. debut against Jarrell Miller. Jarrell Miller tested hot for all those banned substances, all those performance-enhancing drugs. They were in the market for a replacement. They contacted Adam Kownacki, at which point Adam's people said, he's spoken for. He has a prior engagement. And you know what that prior engagement was? A Chris Arreola fight on FS1.
They immediately took him out of the running, took his name out of the hat for Anthony Joshua.
There were 3 alphabet titles on the line. Multi-million-dollar offer for Adam Kownacki, who was not yet and still isn't a multi-million-dollar fighter. If they turned down that fight, I had serious reservations as to whether or not he would accept this one, in spite of this being an ideal situation for Adam Kownacki, who needs to get himself back in the winner's bracket. I maintain my original position that Adam Kownacki may very well be in the running for Deontay Wilder's next comeback fight. And if he's not, if Deontay Wilder ends up coming back against somebody else...
Let me paint the picture. If he don't accept the offer for Derek...
And he doesn't end up fighting the likes of a Deontay Wilder either. Who else is going to offer Adam Kownacki, coming off of 2 consecutive knockout losses, who else is going to offer him 7 figures?
That guy's got a kid,
A family to feed. And you see these situations in the sport of boxing, you ask yourself, how the hell does this happen when it seems, outside looking in, like a no-brainer? You turned down Anthony Joshua, you turned down Derek Chisora to do what and fight who? If that's not worth your time, what is? And what's happening here?
The managers are in cahoots with the promoters, and the promoters are in cahoots with the broadcaster.
I won't attempt to pass off my anecdotes and annotations as gospel. I can only tell you what I think. And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do. When I see a situation like this, I see a situation to where the manager, who is normally supposed to speak on the behalf of the fighter, not necessarily the promoter, not necessarily the network or the broadcast partner. What I see is a situation to where the manager may be working in tandem with the promoter,
with the network's best interests in mind, not the fighter.
And it's not supposed to be that way. The promoter, they're getting their budget from their broadcast partner. So they're going to have their broadcast partner's best interests in mind, not necessarily the fighters. But the manager, the fighter's manager...
The fighter's manager is supposed to have the fighter's best interests in mind.
Not necessarily the promoters or the promoter's broadcast partner. The manager is supposed to be working for the fighter. And I see a situation here to where perhaps these managers, over there on the PBC side of things, they're not necessarily working for the fighter so much as they're working in tandem with the PBC as a whole, the PBC as an outfit. And the PBC is prioritizing what is best for their broadcast partner, not necessarily for their fighter. And that ends up costing their fighters, a lot of fucking money. Like Adam Kownacki turning down an Anthony Joshua fight. Like Luis Ortiz also.
Like Gervonta Davis passing on $7 or $8 million for a Tevin Farmer fight.
Like Jermall Charlo doing the same thing. The exact same thing when it came to a Demetrius Andrade unification match. What I think is going on here is these fighters' managers are getting financial incentives from the promoter to keep their guys on that side of the street, even if it comes at the cost of big cash for the fighter.
That's what I think is going on, because many of these fighters don't have exclusivity deals with networks.
They don't have exclusivity deals with the networks that they fight on. That's why so many of them floated seamlessly from Fox over to Showtime, back to Fox, or back over to Showtime.
Exclusivity, that's something that you have to pay for.
But if neither a Fox or a Showtime has offered Adam Kownacki, for example, an exclusivity deal
for a big amount of fucking money,
like Anthony Joshua's old exclusivity deal with Sky Sports, like Terrence Crawford's years old exclusivity deal with ESPN. Unless you got one of those and it's that kind of situation.
What incentive is there for the fighter to stay on that one network, just that one network, when there's money for him elsewhere?
Well, that's the thing. Devoid of an exclusivity deal, there's not much incentive for a fighter to maneuver this way. But what if the manager, the fighter's manager, is receiving financial incentives to keep that fighter on that network in the absence of an exclusivity deal?
What if the manager isn't acting in good faith on the fighter's behalf?
What if the manager is being paid by way of the promoter and or the broadcast partner to keep the fighter away from certain fights that are on other sides of the street, on competing platforms? What if the manager is being given financial incentives?
That's one theory. That's one way you can explain it.
It's one way you can explain Adam Kownacki turning down 2 7-figure prices, 2 7-figure paydays.
Maybe he's on reserve for Deontay Wilder.
And let's hope that he is, because if he isn't, I don't know who else is going to offer this guy a 7-figure price, a 7-figure payday, making this a boneheaded move. Another boneheaded move.
The only fight that could pay him better than a Chisora fight is a Wilder fight.
So let's see if he gets it. And finally, in men's super lightweight news, former unified lightweight champion Teofimo Lopez took to social media ahead of his super lightweight debut and stated, "Man, I asked for Jose Ramirez and all the top heads at 140.
All the top guys.
We're still discussing the fighter. The fighters don't want nothing to do with me," shaking my head. "And Josh Taylor is a whole bitch. Man's protected like he's in..."
Like he's in WITSEC.
Is that witness protection?
I think it is.
To which world title challenger Jack Caterrall replied, "I agree, he's a fucking bitch. He won't fight me, so he won't be fighting you anytime soon, but we can get it on in the meantime." To which Teofimo Lopez replied, "I'm down." Jack Caterrall stated, "I didn't expect anything less. Tell your team to contact me directly and we can get it on." To which Teofimo Lopez replied, "On it now, just don't flip the switch on me." To which Jack replied, "There'll be no flip switching. I'm not the tart and tomato."
He said Tamarsole. What the hell is a Tamarsole?
A cross between a tornado and an asshole, I gather. Teofimo Lopez finished off by saying, "Say less, my guy. Have a blessed weekend. Enjoy the family. Talk soon."
I think most of us were expecting Teofimo Lopez to take on Arnold Barboza in his 140-pound debut.
As it stands, he's supposed to be taking on Pedro Campas August 13th as he ascends to the 140-pound division on the heels of his big upset loss to George Kambosos. George, who's going to be in action this weekend against Devin Haney.
We'll talk about that fight in another video.
Should we expect to see Teofimo Lopez take on the likes of Jack Caterrall in the near future? I'll say that it's a fight that is a viable fight, that doesn't come with all the promotional and network politics a lot of other fights.
He's not going to fight Jack next, you understand. He's going to fight Pedro Campas next.
I think it's important that we get that established. Better still, a Jack Caterrall fight beyond that Pedro Campas fight is a viable option for Teofimo Lopez, because Teofimo,
he doesn't have the constraints that a champion might have, mandatory.
Things of that nature. Teofimo Lopez is more or less free at this time to make whatever fights with whatever fighters are willing to fight him, Jack Caterrall included. And in that way, Jack Caterrall, who is a pro-bellum fighter,
well, there's no platform issues or promotional politics to have to worry about. They're not on competing platforms.
The sides of the street stuff, it doesn't even really come into it. Though before it even can become about Jack Caterrall, he's got to get past Pedro Campas first.
We'll see if he does, because there are still a lot of people out there that aren't convinced Teofimo's in the right headspace.
There really is only one way to convince them. Convince those skeptics that Teofimo can return to being the guy that starched Richard Comey, that upset the apple cart for Vasyl Lomachenko. There's really only one way to convince those skeptics that Teofimo can get it together, and that's by getting in the ring and getting back to being the guy that he was, getting himself back in the winner's bracket. Then a Jack Caterrall fight becomes a viable possibility, and a credible scalp for young Teofimo Lopez.
You saw how Jack Caterrall made Josh Taylor look.
For whatever reason, he made him look that way. Intangibles, boxing, or otherwise. There are a lot of people that feel Jack Caterrall won that fight, and I'm one of them.
So just imagine if Teofimo goes in there with that same Jack Caterrall.
The same one that most people feel beat Josh Taylor. Just imagine that young Teofimo is able to go in there with that guy and have a better handle on the situation than Josh Taylor did. Hell, just imagine if Teofimo Lopez can do to Jack Caterrall what he did to Richard Comey.
What a statement that would be.
I think that for Teofimo, psychologically, he could move forward the victory like that with the confidence that whatever happened with George was a fluke, circumstantial, all based on what was going on at the time, that George simply caught him at the most opportune time to catch him, but he very much still is the quote-unquote takeover, as it were, ready to take over the super lightweight division. I think a victory like that would go a long way towards reestablishing young Teofimo Lopez as a force, a dominant force, at or around these weights.
Teofimo's supposed to be coming back August the 13th.
If these rumors and rumblings check out, he will be going head-to-head with the Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz heavyweight pay-per-view.
That don't bode well for Luis Ortiz and Andy Ruiz.
Having an equally intriguing fight happening that same day without the hefty pay-per-view cover charge.
Let's be honest, Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz is a decent fight, but it's not a fight that anybody was asking for.
I don't even think it's a bad fight. I think that it's not pay-per-view worthy. I think ideally you put a fight like that on regular Showtime or regular Fox. What you don't do is ask people for $80 to see something they weren't asking to see.
That's assuming they really want to do it on the 13th and they don't end up moving off that date.
I think the people over there at Top Rank and ESPN can move forward with an August 13th date confidently because their fight doesn't come with a hefty price point, an $80 price point.
They ain't got to worry about Ruiz versus Ortiz taking away viewership from them.
No, if anything, it's the other way around. It is less than ideal to stage a pay-per-view the same night as a top-ranked show on ESPN, the biggest sports network in the country, and people are already intrigued to see whether or not Teofimo Lopez can get back to his winning ways.
These comments from Teofimo have left us with a lot to think about.
He says he wants all the top guys at 140 pounds. He says he is being avoided.
We'll assess the validity of that in another video.